Watching Commander games among Final Fantasy Precons, there was always one deck that consistently performed better than the others, no matter who was piloting it. The Titus deck always showed effective gameplay. It would put out an aggressive board, make it clear it was a threat, and would either win or get taken down by a few board wipes. It would be shut down, and that would be the end. That's why today in my analysis of Titus deck I decided to focus on a problem that's been there from the start in this archetype. Yes, the Precon is absolutely functional. There are some interesting synergies here and a very good selection of creatures. Precon is okay, but it needs a little polish. And the problem that exists here is the lack of early drops. The first drops are those early plays on turn 1 or 2 that let you get ahead quickly. Notable are efficient ones like Soul Ring, Hardened Scales, and Path to Exile. An offer you can't refuse. Offer you can't refuse is the only counterspell that's actually supposed to protect you somehow, giving your opponent 2 treasures instead of a devastating board wipe. But where are the 1-mana creature cards with counters? Where's the setup to cast your commander on turn 2, as you'd hope? If you really want all of that, it's just not here. Our commander Titus, Yuna S. Guardian, is a legendary 3/3 creature for green. White and blue at the beginning of combat on your turn you can move any counter, not only +1 counter, but any counter from a creature under your control to another target creature under your control. It also have cheer. Cheer says whenever 1 or more creatures you control with counters, doesn't matter if they're +1, any counters, even indestructible or shield counters, deal combat damage to a player, you may draw a card and proliferate. You can only do this once each turn. Even if we send 3 creatures at 3 opponents, it still only triggers once, so we're not a very aggressive deck. We want to hit face, but ideally, we'd like to get that 1 card each turn. But we don't have to hit 2 or 3 opponents. By the way, you can break this a little in your play. Spark Double as a copy of Titus will come in with counter. Titus will move counter from Spark Double onto himself, and then you'll draw 2 cards and proliferate twice. This option is possible, but we'll talk about it a bit later. What are we missing? We're missing first or second drops, meaning creatures entering battlefield with counters. Dash Shellcrawler, a 0/3, gets a +1 counter. If Titus comes out on turn 3 next, then Dash Shellcrawler and go on the attack. Titus would draw a card because likely Dash Shellcrawler will be able to hit face on turn 3. There aren't that many creatures on turn 3 yet. For opponents, usually, the first and second turns are just setup turns, and depending on the turn order, there might be some blockers, but most likely you'll find an open face you can get through to. Some creatures don't do anything. Grateful Apparition doesn't do anything. It just proliferates when it hits face, and if there aren't any counters, then there's nothing to proliferate. Lord Giscoguado, who also, at the beginning of your end step, if counters were placed on this creature, you get to investigate. So, it requires you to put counters on itself. Then it will give us a trigger to investigate, and maybe later we'll spend 2 mana to draw. Well, that's complication. That's really just complication for your own plan. Instead of just adding to a deck creatures like Schooler of New Horizon, which enters with counters, and which also have an activated ability, like removing counters from a permanent you control. It could be, again, finality counters, lore counters, search your library for a plains card, reveal it, maybe ramp a bit, or maybe just put it into your hand. So, we have some really good creature that, when Titus enters, will put counters on themselves. And then they won't have summoning sickness anymore, and they can go on the attack, or nothing will happen. So, it's a 50% chance. I made tags for this deck. And in my opinion, the best creature are Walking Ballista, Dask Shellcrawler, and Gyre Sage. This is the mana base, which will trigger when Titus enters, and also evolves. It will grow a little. It will either give you mana or draw you a card, depending on what you want. Very interesting. OAK Traveling Merchant, to all players who play Mirko. And in general, to anyone dealing with decks with finality counters. Pay attention to this creature, for just 2 mana, by turn 3 or maybe turn 2. You get the effect. Remove a counter from a non-land permanent you control, from any non-land permanent, and draw a card. This is a very efficient, Really cool creature. The fact that it costs about $1.50, maybe more, means it will be accessible. The magnificent Shelinda. You have an acolyte. When another creature enters under your control, put a +1/+1 counters on this creature if its power is less than Shelinda's power. So, for all the 1/1s and 0/1s, we'll put extra counters on them. In the other case, put counters on Shelinda. That means she'll put it on herself. If Titus comes out bigger, she puts counters on herself, becomes a 3/3 with lifelink, goes on the attack, hits face, and you draw a card. Shelinda is magnificent, probably one of the best drops, bred for the hunt. Does something similar when your commander triggers. If a creature with +1 counters hits face, draw a card. For each creature that gets to the face, draw a card. It's a very efficient enchantment, a very interesting creature. Riku, Resourceful Guardian. Riku has trigger when you put 1 or more counters on a creature, until end of turn. This creature can't be blocked by creatures controlled by your opponents, so it gives evasion, and it has a cool ability, Steal, for 1 and tap, remove a counter from a target creature under an opponent's control, not yours, someone else's, remove their counter, and move it onto your own. It's just fantastic. Activates only as a sorcery, but as a thief, it works great. Other best creatures in this deck are all summons creatures, because as for how summon works, this is an enchantment creature saga. There was nothing like this before Final Fantasy. There are permanents like this now, and by removing lore counters, we can move from the second chapter to the first, or from first to 0, and we will constantly have a very strong effect. For example, Ixen, he has Arrow Spark exile target creature under the opponent's control until this saga leaves. On the battlefield, with Yojimbo, it's simply exile target artifact. An enchantment or a tapped creature under an opponent's control, without this downside view until this saga leaves. On the battlefield, these are very powerful effects. Veilfor is probably my favorite. It's removal for 3 creatures with the highest mana base. Each opponent chooses the creature with the highest mana value among creatures they control and returns those creatures to their owner's hands. This is a fantastic effect that we can repeat over and over again. So if Veilfor or Yojimbo enter the battlefield and you have Titus on the battlefield, you remove counters with Titus, put them, say, on himself or on another creature, so that you can get some additional effect faster. And by manipulating this, you can achieve some really serious board control. This is a good thing. There are Kimari who have vigilance, and he has a fantastic Ronso Rage trigger. At the beginning of combat, he puts counters on himself, which is great. He taps a target creature controlled by your opponent, so there won't be any great blocker, and then we can make him become a copy of that creature, except that he keeps this thing, his name, and triggered ability. So he can become not just a 3/3, but someone bigger, gains some keywords like flying, haste, trample, other stats, other triggers, maybe attack triggers and vigilance. And he also keeps this ability, so Kimari keeps getting bigger, stronger, and more powerful depending on who you're playing against. This is one of the best creatures in this deck. It can get through to the opponent's face, draw us a card, and also deal combat damage. And Titus will be really happy because counters will be placed on Kimari, and at the beginning of combat, you'll be able to move those counters around. Yeah, if there aren't any counters, Kimari Titus won't be able to move anything because the ability won't trigger, but hopefully we'll have some smaller creatures on which we can remove counters. I'm not going to go over every card in this deck so the video doesn't drag on. There are 37 lands here. There's one Anthem effect that says creatures with counters get double strike. Most likely, that's supposed to be finisher. Chocobo Knights just come out. They don't have counters on them. They don't put any on themselves. They just say double strike. We have about 11 ways, besides the commander, draw for various actions. Or to increase the number of cards in hand, the best is bred for the hunt. It's interesting that there's an instant here. A kind of mana sink. Draw X, discard 1 card. Pull from tomorrow. But overall, not bad. We have some evasion, in the form of Riku and Daskshell Crawler. Dask Shell Crawler isn't the only one with that effect. In Magic the Gathering's history, other creatures give a similar effect. If a creature has +1 counters, it has trample. There's even an enchantment. An enchantment for 2 mana, 1 green, that just gives all your creatures trample. Regardless of whether they have counters or not, it gives some kind of drain. I also added protection magic here. Overall, this can be considered evasion for the future, because, well, Riku. If you play protection magic, Riku said that your creatures with new counters can't be blocked this turn, and also, when you put counters on a creature, it gets one-time protection. You can do a simple combo like that, but there isn't much evasion, so you'll need something. In Magic the Gathering, there are cards that say if your creature has +1 counters, it gets flying. And that's exactly what I'd like to see here, but we'll talk about that when we get to the cards that I want to see in this deck. Or if I were to upgrade this deck, I would try to use that set of cards, by the way. Right now I have, well, about 53 cards that I'd like to put in here. For other decks, I couldn't come up with such a large set. But counters really let you go wild, if you'll allow me to put it that way. So, this is the set of cards that make me question why they're here. And maybe you'll be surprised, but I don't like having Bane of Progress here, because when upgrading a deck, we might want to have some enchantments. And this would just shoot us in the foot. Yes, it's the ultimate response to artifact and enchantments, but don't forget that we have our own artifact or enchantment creatures that have really powerful effect. When playing with counters, you really don't want to lose that enchantment creatures at all. I don't like Farewell here for the exact same reason. Enchantments are usually what I want to wipe out in a deck with Farewell. But in that case, if I'm playing Farewell, I have, let's say, only 1 or 2 enchantments in that deck. Overall, I try not to get caught by my own board wipe. There aren't many artifacts in this deck, but there are some artifact creatures, like Walking Ballista, that you also really don't want to lose. So, a board wipe that's supposed to solve all our problems won't solve all our problems. At best, we'll be exiling graveyards as efficiently as possible, since we hardly interact with graveyards ourselves. And we don't want to exile all the creatures, because this is a creature deck. We need our creature to get through to the opponent's face. That's why I don't like Farewell here. Same for another card. Promise of Loyalty. We don't sacrifice our own creatures. Each player puts a vow counter on a creature they control and sacrifices the rest. None of those creatures can attack you or planeswalkers you control as long as they have a vow counter on them. You know, yeah, if we played our commander, and then next turn played a land, Soul Ring, and Promise of Loyalty, that's a good play. That's a tempo play that leaves our opponents, if they've played a bunch of creatures or their commander in the early turns, in a situation where you're somewhat protected from some of the scariest creatures they might choose. But if we played a few creatures on turns 1 and 2, then on turn 4, 5, or 6, we don't want to play Promise of Loyalty. We really don't want to do that. So before that, there should be a board wipe or so. We need to play a creature, then next turn cast Promise of Loyalty, and only after that play Titus to try to get back into the game. I don't get what Promise of Loyalty is supposed to do here. I don't like it. The good thing is the board wipe damning verdict. I don't understand why we're not using mass bounce spells, because we need to get through to the face, and a mass bounce as a board wipe could work for us. Of course, Cyclonic Rift would be great, but I don't play Cyclonic Rift in my casual decks. I think that's just going a bit too far, and it looks like Finisher. Sin, Unending Cataclysm. Legendary creature. Leviathan. Avatar. Flying. Trample. When it enters the battlefield, remove all counters from any number of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. Sin enters the battlefield with that many counters on itself, where X is twice the number of counters removed this way. When it dies, put all those counters on target creature you control. Then shuffle this card into its owner's library. It's cool that it shuffles itself back in. It's cool that it comes in huge. It's not cool that it doesn't have haste. It's not cool that after it comes in, it'll get killed next turn, and it's not cool we spent all that on it. 7 mana, no haste, and it won't even hit face. Yeah, if it comes in huge and they can't deal with it during one turn, that's a massive amount of damage. No question about it. For 7 mana. Well, we can get about the same number of counters on a Mana Gorger Hydra that comes out on turn 3 and sits there. People keep casting spells. Every cast is a counter. That has trample too. It doesn't have lifelink. But people will have to block it and try to negotiate with us, making deals about where Hydra will attack or not. Sin is cool, really big and impressive, but most likely it'll just get killed instantly the moment it hits the battlefield. I also don't really like Path of Discovery. When a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it explores, you reveal a card. If it's a land, you put it into your hand. Otherwise, you put counters on your creature, then put that card back on top of your deck. I think there are more efficient ways to put counters on your creatures for 4 mana, and let it be a creature, not an enchantment. Maybe it would even cost a little more, but still, reveal your top decks when you're not building a deck around it. Isn't great, because it's a revealing of unnecessary information to your opponents. General Patron, not General. Generous Patron. I don't really like it either, because it's the only creature that puts counters on an opponent's creature. Yeah, the idea is that you put one counter on one of your own creature, another counter on an opponent's creature, and you draw a card for 3 mana. This effect doesn't seem very effective. Also not very effective, in my opinion, is Chasm Skulker. Yes, it grows when you draw cards. It'll keep getting bigger, sure. You can remove counters from it, but it conflicts with Titus in terms of mana value. Then it dies, and when it's in the graveyard, it creates Squid's tokens, equal to the number of counters it had. And well, it seems like you'd probably rather draw more cards, right, than get a bunch of token. Yeah, they're blockers, and yeah, they could potentially be attacking creatures too, which you could also use for counters. But I don't know, the effect is kind of weak. Overall, it's not clear what Endless Detour is doing here. The owner of the target spell, not land permanent, or card in the graveyard puts it on the top or bottom of their library. If you want to play aggro with effects, just play Regrowth. If you want this to be a bounce and hold up 3 mana for it, it doesn't look like this deck ever holds up 3 mana. It just wants to keep going forward and forward and forward, because that's how it's going to be. You taped out, play your combat, draw a card, and then what? Then you just pass the turn. Yeah, if we're in a situation where a board wipe is coming, we can bounce the spell for 3 mana. But wouldn't it be easier to play something else if we're worried? Negate. Just play negate. For 2 mana, instead of 3 colored mana, which is hard to hold up every turn if we're suddenly afraid of something. Plus, you have the option to put it on top of your library, but that just means the board wipe will come next turn. I don't like that card, no matter what it is. And a couple of creatures that basically do nothing for 2 mana. Those are slots that should be more effective. We do have a few options for Proliferate. Inexorable Tide. Whenever you cast a spell, Proliferate. Here we have Lulu, Stern Guardian. I think it's much better to use. Instead of Inexorable Tide, Dreamtide Whale from Modern Horizons 3, which is a 7/5. It proliferates whenever a player, not just you, but any player, casts their second spell in a turn it has Vnishing counters. Those are also counters. And we can move or proliferate them too. You might not want to move those counters, but you can definitely proliferate them. This is a creature. Most likely it will get through to the opponent and deal a lot of damage, or take the enchantment Inexorable Tide. For example, Inexorable Tide, it seems, wants us to cast a lot of small spells. And then put a bunch of counters on something really cool. We don't have a single planeswalker we could proliferate with Inexorable Tide, all the way up to their ultimate ability. But we wish we did, although, overall, I don't really support playing with Planeswalker. I don't have a single deck, and most likely never will, That's dedicated to Planeswalker, because it's just humiliating how much time it takes. A player, step by step, pressing every button, moves their counters. I don't want to be that kind of player who eats up all game time. And honestly, making your opponent sit through that. There's just a small amount of ramp here, and overall, I like the ramp that's included, but I would add a bit more, just to have the ability to stay in the late game. We have one piece of recursion, which is really good. When a creature under your control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield with flying counters. These are all counters. Titus will come back too. All the small creature without flying will return, and it'll be awesome. That's another reason why I don't want to see these two flying creatures in the deck. Because they have flying, they won't come back with Luminous Broodmoth. Overall, turn 3. Titus turn for Luminous Broodmoth. You're safe from board wipes. And board wipes are what will really slow you down. We have quite a lot of removal. Yes, some of it I'd like to swap out for something more effective. Maybe targeted removal or control. I prefer control, because keeping a couple of mana open, in my opinion, is easier than trying to in situations like these. With mass board wipes, somehow find a way to protect your pieces. And quite a lot. That's why this deck works. There are quite a few elements here that, in one way or another, generate counters, and that's not all. I haven't even added creatures yet that are also sagas, because they come into play with counters themselves. And because of the large number of creatures and other elements that generate counters on their own, this deck works. Now, I want to draw your attention to the things I would like to see here. Overall, I think they can be considered upgrades. Among the artifact, of course, is Ozolith, which is missing here, Agatha's Soul Cauldron as a piece. Not a victory, not a combo. But there is a ballista here. If the ballista gets destroyed or we destroy the ballista ourselves, Agatha's Soul Cauldron exiles the ballista, and all our creatures with counters turn into ballistas. So, it's Graveyard Hate that can also give you a huge advantage, especially if you have activated abilities. That is, there are a few activated abilities present here. Incubation Druid can be activated, Gyre Sage can be activated, the Walking Ballista can be activated. If you come up with something else, it gets better. For example, if you have an activated ability, remove a counter to draw a card. Agatha's Soul Cauldron looks amazing. Perfect. You can even steal your opponent's counters. Agatha's Soul Cauldron is something you really want to see here. Explorers cache a cheap artifact that enters the battlefield with 2 counters. When a creature you control with counters dies, put those counters on this artifact, tap it, no mana needed, to move counters from this artifact onto a target creature. It's cheap, efficient, it comes out, Titus in, put counters on Titus. If he ramped, that's Titus turn 2. By turn 3 he has counters. That's your problem to solve. You need to put counters on creatures before or as Titus enters play a 1-drop. Like Explorer's Cache on turn 2, Titus comes out with Explorer's Cache, either put counters on Titus or another creature. Move counters, send it into attack, and by turn 3 you're already drawing a card. That's what you want to achieve, that by turn 3, or even turn 2 if possible, you're drawing card Great Henge. Well, there are no questions here. It puts counters by itself. It's draw a card. Since you might have a pretty big board, it can be played for 2 mana, and it will give you 2 mana. An insanely broken card that will be super effective here. Next, let's move on to creatures. Market Backwalker. Creature enters with +1 counters. Like Walking Ballista, it can add counters to itself at 4 mana when it dies. You draw a card for each +1 counter on it, and you can store up counters on this creature, and then refresh your hand when there's a board wipe. So, it's a kind of insurance against board wipes. Now, Stonecoil Serpent is a fantastic creature that can be played for just 1 mana. Remember 1-drops? This is that one, it enters the battlefield. It has reach, trample, and protection from multicolored. Then say, you play Thief on turn 2 or 3. This one goes on the attack. It draws you a card. Protection from multicolored gives you a kind of evasion. If we keep growing this creature, both the trample and reach will work great. I really like the idea of District Mascot turn. It comes in right away with counters. It has an ability. Remove 2 counters from this creature. Destroy target artifact. That's the kind of removal I like. Usually, we don't need to throw a Bane of Progress in and destroy everything. We need to remove one specific problem. That's where District Mascot can handle that. Plus, we can easily saddle it. With Titus, for example, Sappa 1, Titus comes in, we tap it, and when this creature attacks while saddled, we can put +1 counters on it. So it will keep growing. And here you have an ability for 2 mana to remove 2 counters. Next up, Goldvein Hydra. Yes, it's expensive, but it does a lot. Remember, I mentioned that you want to have some ramp, because after a board wipe we might lose tempo and not be able to get back into the game. Goldvein Hydra. It can help you regain that tempo, because when it dies, you create treasure tokens equal to its power. You can grow it, play it on early turns, put counters on it, remove counters, basically work with it in different ways. Vigilance, trample, and haste are all effective right away the turn you play it. Cool. Hopeful Initiate, he has training, that is, he can lay counters it on himself. When this creature attacks with another creature with greater power, so you play Hopeful Initiate on turn 1. 1-2 you play something with power 2 on turn 2. On turn 3 you play Titus. He goes on the attack, trains, puts counters on himself, gets through to the opponent, and draws us cards by removing 2 counters, not just from himself, but from anywhere. You can destroy a target artifact or enchantment. It's very similar to a mascot, for a small amount of mana. On instant, you remove counters, and deal with the problem. Enchantment or artifact. Ingenious Prodigy. It can also be played for 1 mana. Then you can put counters on it, and slowly remove them during upkeep to draw cards. An excellent creature. You can also grow it. It has built-in evasion. And it can't be blocked by creature with greater power than it has, so most likely it will get through to the face. Draw you cards. You'll put counters on it. Remove counters from it, and draw even more cards. It looks very efficient for a small investment. And Orky Jelly is a funny creature. I would add it just to test it out. I like that it has built-in protection against removal. If the creature dies and it has 2 or more +1 counters on it, then at the end step, create a token of it, and it comes in with half the counters, so you don't lose a creature for future attack. If you need to replay Titus, you can just send Orky Jelly into the attack right away. Its clone token comes in, and again, basically. You deal damage, draw a card, deal damage, draw cards. I really enjoyed searching for my win with this creature. When I did a search, Arcus Acolyte never saw a trigger outlast. I was looking for every other creature. Without counters, it gets outlast. Spend a white or green mana, tap it, put counters on it. This creature lets you put counters on all your creatures. You can only activate counters at sorcery speed. Then, during combat, you can move those counters around, and suddenly, if for some reason somehow these counters on your creatures, well, here's an option for creatures without summoning sickness, all for just 2 mana. It has reach, it has lifelink. Some nice abilities, of course Biophagus, a mana dork giving you mana of any color, and when you cast a creature spell, it comes in with extra counters. From the ramp category, a powerful creature many overlooked. Now its price is going up, but its effectiveness is what really matters. Why is it here? I don't like this print. Let's swap it for the traditional one. This one looks nicer. From Aetherdrift, new cheap creature, Ox for 2 mana. When this creature attacks, if saddled, put counters on target creature. Sacrifice this creature. Creatures you control with counters on them gain hexproof. This is another board protection with counters theme. And when it's saddled for 1, it also puts counters on a target creature. An excellent creature overall for just 2 mana. Board protection on the battlefield from board wipes or targeted removal. for something that's really important to you. This is a look from another angle where Kudo King among bears. We could say that all creatures on the battlefield have a base power and toughness of 22, and they're bears. But that's a big problem. Our bears, thanks to the counters, will be bigger than the opponent's bears. And we can start putting a lot of pressure on the opponent's board. And overall, this can serve as a kind of finisher. Some creatures have base power and toughness 0 to 0. When they enter, they instantly become 2 to 2 or bigger, making them stronger. So I don't see where, as a creature that comes out on turn 2, which will usually be held in hand for a while, until we're ready with a large number of counters. To go somewhere and attack, we play it then say all your demons are now 6/6, the demons 2/2 bears, and our non-demons 2/2 bears. With a large number of counters, it's over for them concede, Polywog Prodigy. Overall, we can believe that this can bring us a pretty large number of cards, a request for non-creature spells during the opponent's turns. If we can grow this creature by turn 2, when it comes out, of course, it won't give us any cards. When Titus comes out, it'll grow a little. If we also manage, somehow, to either trigger its evolve or grow it in some other way, then there will be joy and happiness, and the Polywog Prodigy will give us more and more cards, an interesting creature. Reluctant Role Model. At the start of your second main phase, if this creature is tapped, put a flying, lifelink, or +1 counter on it. When this or another creature you control dies, if it had counters, move those counters to up to 1 target creature. This can give us lifelink and flying counters. What interests me more here, of course, are the flying counters, because flying counters give evasion. Speaking of evasion, I'll jump ahead a bit here, Abzan Falconer. Each creature with +1 counters gains flying. Why Abzan Falconer isn't in this precon, I have no idea. Oh, it just makes sense. It's a cheap card that does a lot in counter decks. Outlast is activated ability. Erden also could be considered as a pretty good addition. It comes out on turn 2, enters the battlefield with counters. Attack, target creature with +1/+1 counters gets first strike. With 2 or more counters, it gets double strike. If it has double strike, no 2-card draw. Unfortunately, this won't trigger Titus's ability, but it will deal a lot of damage. This could be a finisher if that creature has a lot of counters and high power, and if it has some evasion like trample or flying. Why not? Double strike already gives us 1 creature, but it enters without counters. But it gives all our creatures. Erdnan Dramoka Warrior is a budget edition, is worth considering. Next, we have 2 Arwens. 1 Arwen enters with an indestructible counter. She allows you to move the indestructible counter. And if we proliferate the indestructible counter, there will be a lot of them, and we'll have a board full of indestructible counters. So Arwen looks pretty appealing. With a lifelink counter, a +1/+1 counter. They're good, really good, and she puts other counters on herself, so it's going to work well. Eren, and 1 Arwen, and the other Arwen. Because she'll just say that every other creature enters with a number of +1/+1 counters equal to her toughness. We can grow her, and counters can just keep increasing. Also, there's a strange lack of champion of Landhold. Creatures with less power than her can't block. That's real, original evasion in Commander. She grows whenever other creatures enter the battlefield. Champion of Landhold is another way, just like Abzan Falconer, to make your entire board unblockable. Envy of the Ancestors. Modified creatures have lifelink. Equipment, auras, and counters all count as modifications. Giving your board lifelink for 3 mana is great. Malagorger Hydra. Gen Stealers. Very good Tyrant Guard. It has a sacrifice ability. Sacrifice him and creatures you control with counters will gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. You want to play it with counters, but you can also just play it for 3 mana and let it sit on the battlefield. And it serves as this kind of protection. Very good. Basri's Lieutenant. Basri's Lieutenant will allow us, first of all, to hit opponent almost without blocks. It has protection from multicolored. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counters on target creature you control. When this creature or another creature with +1/+1 counters on it dies, create a knight. So this is also a kind of board protection. If everything you have dies, you end up with a bunch of white knights. Crystalline Crawler. When this creature enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counters on it for each color for each colored mana that was spent to cast it. Remove +1/+1 counters to add mana. So basically, it's a mana base with a delayed effect that can also put counters on itself. And, for the most part, in a 3-color deck, you can put 3 counters on it. It will enter the battlefield with 3 counters right away. If you also use Exotic Orchard, and for example, use red mana from an enemy deck, from an opponent's lands, then it will enter with 4 counters. That's 4 for 4, with the ability to store mana for the future. So if you're setting up some kind of explosive turn, then Crystalline Crawler can help you pull it off. Danny Pink. When 1 or more counters are placed for the first time on a creature this turn, draw a card. It has a mentor trigger. Whenever he attacks with creature with lesser power, put +1/+1 counter on it. Danny Pink could draw us a lot of cards. Also consider Denry Klin when it enters. Put a counter of your choice. First Strike, Vigilance, or +1. When a non-token creature enters under your control, if Denry has counters, put the same number of counters on it. Every counter go on that creature. If we put indestructible counter on Denry with Arwen's ability, then all subsequent creatures will enter with indestructible counters, +1 counters, everything we've put together here. Shield counters. We can accumulate things like that. Next to it, we have Falco Spara, who can, in a sense, be an alternative commander. He has flying, trample, and shield counters. You can look at the top card. You can cast spells from the top of your deck by removing counters as an additional cost. We can remove, for example, finality counters, bad counters, lore counters. We can remove them, including those. Falco Spara lets us use counters to cast spells from top of the deck, so that's a kind of card draw. Spark Double, as I mentioned, enters with counter. A copy of your creature. It could be a copy of Titus, or something else good on your board. You can also consider Tributary Instructor Merfolk. It also has a mentor trigger. When a creature you control with counters dies, draw a card. Yes, this is also kind of board protection. So if you have a wide board with counters, you'll be drawing cards. And there are 2 creatures for 5 mana that I consider, not exactly as finisher. But in any case, I'd be interested to test these creatures in this deck. Emissary Green. When it attacks, starting with you, each player votes for profit or security. You create twice as many treasure tokens as there are profit votes. And you put counters on each creature under your control, equal to the number of security votes. So it can put counters on all your creatures at once, greatly boosting your board. And there's also Railway Brawler. We can pay for it to play a future turn for 4 mana. So we played our Titus, paid for plotting Railway Crawler. And then, on the next turn, when Railway Crawler comes out, it will give us this wonderful trigger. Whenever another creature enters under your control, put X counters on it, where X is its power. What else do we have that works with counters? Of course, Cather's Crusade. Funny, well, I get why they didn't include it here. Cathar's Crusade, but admit it, as soon as you play this enchantment, all the attention from then on will be focused only on your board. Basri works wonderfully with this enchantment. Fantastically. Because if there's a board wipe and all your creature with counters, you'll create 2/2 white knights with vigilance. For each creature that died, you'll immediately get as many counters on the new creatures as the number that entered, so you'll end up with a huge board again. This is another kind of protection for your board against board wipes. In my opinion, it's acceptable to have it in this deck, on the battlefield. I'd like to see the Wild Growth enchantment. We need ramp on turn 1. Dawn of a New Age. If we proliferate, it'll only cost 2 mana. We'll be able to regularly draw cards in our end steps. We could proliferate to add counters, then remove the counters, everything in detail. You can draw a card at the end of the turn anyway. Of course, it's better not to play this on turn 2, but to wait. You'll probably want to play it on turn 4, when you've already got a Titus out and he's ready to proliferate. Maybe even another small creature has come out by then. And then Dawn of a New Age comes into play, and from there, you go into combat, proliferate, and for several turns you've secured yourself some card draw, an efficient effect for just 2 mana in white. Court of Garenbrig. Considering that this deck plays off a wide board and wants to see counters, Court of Garenbrig does it all. It puts 2 counters on up to 2 creatures. If you're the Monarch, it doubles the counters on each creature you control. Can you protect the Monarch? Well, if you have both flying and big creatures, then most likely yes. So here, you can actually achieve this pretty effectively. That trigger happens when you remain the Monarch. And introducing the Monarch mechanic, overall, will be useful for almost any casual deck. Kellen Joins Up is worth considering. You can exile a non-land card with a mana cost of 3 or less from your hand. If you do, it becomes plotted. When a legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 on each creature. Kellen Joins Up. This is an enchantment that basically turns 3 mana into 3 mana. In the future, the cast order will just be a little different, but you'll still get this effect. Whenever legendary enters, put a counter on each creature. Under your control. Titus enters, counters are placed, then Titus goes into combat and moves some counter onto a creature that can attack. And it went in with 2 extra counters. And all of this is thanks to Kellen Joins Up, which is just hanging out on your battlefield. And nobody pays any attention to it. And here's another small alternative. When a creature you control dies, put 2 counters on target creature. Battle of Hoover Dam. Sometimes you'll need to attack, even if it means losing some creatures. Overall, as you've seen, we have some death triggers in the suggested. Cards. Understanding that creature will die and you'll get blocked, but you still need to get through to the face somehow, to draw cards and advance your gameplay. So, both options here are generally fine for you. Return target creature with mana cost 3 or less from your grave to battlefield at end step with counters on it. If it was killed, it comes back with counters. At end step, you reanimated a creature. You moved finality counters. Or maybe it just went into attack. You can also consume or move finality counters. In this deck, that will work. Or if you really want to, if you feel like a board wipe is coming or there's a deck with a bit of removal for small creatures, for example, then you choose Legion. So, the enchantment Battle of Hoover Dam will work both ways. No matter which option you choose, it depends on your opponent. Next, I want to add Heroic Intervention and Clever Concealment. I want even more protection for the board. I'd say it's fine if there are 6 or 7 cards for board protection. And Swords to Plowshares. And in terms of lands, I think you can use Proliferate a little bit. Our story. And use lands that enters tapped with depletion counters. They let you remove depletion counters from them and add 2 mana. And this land is sacrificed if there are no depletion counters. You can really ramp ahead in mana by quite a lot. And thanks to Proliferate triggers, you'll constantly be adding those depletion counters on your lands. This works in any color. If we're already skipping our first turn, then let's skip it for something like this. Something effective, worth playing with storage counters. We put a storage counter here and save them up, then at the right moment, we play something big by removing X storage counters. Especially since we have Proliferate in the command zone. Overall, you can use and try testing them out during gameplay. It might be worth removing some of the tapped lands. After all, it's an untapped land and colorless, which isn't great, but you could try it as an experiment. You could also try Diamond City, shield counter. You can move that shield counter onto a target creature. Thanks to Proliferate, we can storage them a bit, and then we can spread out these shield counters. You can also proliferate directly onto the creature and the monumental facade, the oil counters. Since for our guy Titus doesn't really care. What type of counters is on the creature that made it to the face? So you can basically use Lucan Trek, but that's more of an ultra budget option, and Clock Tower. Control, land from the Doctor Who set. For 12 counters, you exile it for shuffle graveyard your hand, and draw 7 cards. You can only activate it if you control. Time Lord. That will never happen. Why did I put it in here? Add it? We're never going to control the Time Lord. I just really wanted to. Okay, we might be able to control the deck. You could add the 13th Doctor here. The 13th Doctor. If the 13th Doctor is added to this deck, then this deck will gain pseudo-vigilance. Plus, sometimes it will put counters on. Sometimes. So, I probably wouldn't really want to add it. The 13th Doctor says that when you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, put +1 counter on target creature. Most of the time, we'll be casting from our hand. Of course, if we have Falco, then Falco will start to synergize well with the 13th Doctor. But that's not much. There's a second trigger here, Team TARDIS. At the beginning of your end step, untap each creature you control with counters on it. That's kind of vigilance is pretty cool. And then you'll have a Time Lord there. Well, let's add that to considering, but... Again, it's better to use that land only if you've decided to add the 13th Doctor here. This is something I wanted to see. Wave goodbye. Each creature without a +1/+1 counter is returned to its owner's hand. These are the kinds of board wipes that should be in this deck, but they weren't there. This is a good addition to this deck. We ended up with a long video. This is a playable deck straight out of the box, which, with a little bit of tuning, can reveal itself quite consistently and effectively. As you can see, I have a lot of cards that I suggest you consider. And here, you can go in completely different directions. We can go with the route of different types of counters. We can go with the route of small creatures. You can try to build something through evolve triggers, training, mentor, outlast. And each of these builds will be a little different from the others. So, you can definitely say that Titus and his deck are a solid foundation. But which direction you want to take it in is entirely up to your haste. If this video was helpful, I hope you'll respond with a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. The final review of modern Final Fantasy is coming up. We'll be taking a look at the Reanimator. Oh, I love reanimation.